Beavers as Agents of Restoration, presented by Amanda Parrish and Joe Cannon of the Beaver Solution Project, coordinated by the Lands Council in Spokane, Washington.
So our plan for this program, our scope of work begins with beaver reintroduction. So reintroducing beavers to appropriate locations. And this is really implementing the science that's already been done. And we're not reinventing the wheel with these beaver reintroductions. Following the reintroductions, we hope to monitor their activity and their ecosystem services, and that's through water quality monitoring, our vegetation monitoring, and more. We also hope to mitigate damage to private land so that relocation of nuisance beaver is not the only option. We'd really like beaver to stay where they are and help landowners live peacefully with beaver that have decided to move onto their property, and so focusing on tree protection, flow control devices, and more. We will report our results, of course, so that we can continue to add to this scientific dialogue of using beaver as restoration agents. And every month, it seems, that goes by, we learn more and more about this. And so as we learn what's effective and what's not, we really want to implement adaptive management. Finally, and perhaps most importantly, is education and outreach. We recognize that our program and similar programs will not work without public support and public interest. So, to reiterate, the restoration treatment we're talking about here is beavers as habitat restoration. And I really want to hit this point home. This is a low input, low cost, natural, self-perpetuating restoration. And just to take a moment to explain how very natural this is, prior to being trapped to near extirpation in the 1850s, beaver were the dominant managers of our streams here in North America. Their influence is on both hydrology and vegetation, more so than any other animal except humans. And so looking to beaver-influenced ecosystems as a model of restoration for our streams and headwaters is really the most natural form of ecosystem that we can recreate here in North American streams. So as I just mentioned, beaver manage their ecosystems in two main ways: by changing the local hydrology through obviously their dam building, and that influences through increased water storage, raising the water table, increased stream sinuosity, and more. And they also have direct and indirect impacts on vegetation through, again, their dam building, their feeding habits. Obviously, they're herbivorous creatures, as well as coppicing and digging up mud and redistributing that seed bank in the area. Beaver-related hydrology has a number of human benefits and ecosystem services. Some of the human benefits are increased late-season water supply. Going back to House Bill 2860, one of its goals was not only for water storage, but increased late-season flow for agriculture, and so this is an obvious human benefit, as well as the fish and wildlife habitat for recreation and buffering of flooding events. Some of the ecosystem services, and this is by no means a complete list, but fish habitat for rearing and spawning. The dams are able to collect sediment out of the water table, filter the water of pollution and impurities. The slow flow helps raise the water table, which in turn reconnects the stream to the floodplain, which directly benefits native wetland plant species. And any warming in the water from the beaver ponds is offset by cooling downstream from groundwater seepage downstream from that groundwater that's stored in the ponds. Here we have an illustration that I've borrowed from Robert Nyman's research, and on the left you see a stream prior to any beaver activity, and on the right is that stream after beaver have built 3 dams. The dashed line represents the extent of the water table influence, and so you can see on the left that the water table doesn't extend very far out from the stream, whereas on the right, once there have been ponds created, the water table influence extends out even further. And if you can see, there are numbers inside those represent habitat types, and so on the left there's really only one habitat type, one riparian ecosystem, and once beaver dam influence occurs, there's an increase of up to 4 times that amount of habitat types. So beaver influence on hydrology not only directly impacts the hydrology, but has a great impact on wetland vegetation and the conditions that are supportive of different types of heterogeneous communities. Here is an illustration that we borrowed from Jordan and Pollock's research to illustrate beaver ecology. So what you see here is a cycle of incision and filling in a semi-arid landscape, stream landscape, such as the Columbia River Basin. And in that first illustration, A, we see a healthy ecosystem with a stream fully connected to its floodplain, a high water table that allows for diverse wetland plant species. Through changes in land management, which could be a number of things, stream power increases and begins to incise that alluvium layer until finally the stream is confined to a narrow trench. And with that incision, the water table is lowered. And so not only do we see a decrease in water storage, but no longer is that water table up to the level to support favorable conditions. Now at C, over time, that incision channel widens due to meanders in the stream over time. And we see that the stream is almost all the way down to the bedrock layer, so there's virtually no water storage. The water table is not connected to the historic floodplain, and now conditions are more favorable for upland species. In D, we see a treatment such as beaver dams could increase the sediment collection in the area. So as sediment begins to fill in that incision channel, so does the water table raise with the stream. And slowly we see a change in riparian species until E and F, we finally see a floodplain, a stream that's connected to its historic floodplain, and a water table that's relatively high, making both groundwater storage increase as well as more favorable conditions for wetland plant species once again. So this is really how beaver dams can be used in restoration in semi-arid environments. And I'm going to turn it over to my colleague Joe to talk about how we are applying some of this science to our own relocation sites.
We have a variety of starting conditions for each site. For instance, we might get a site where there really isn't any building material or food for the beavers, so we actually have to go in and maybe plant some trees or some willow wattles and take a few years to build the habitats, and then bring the beaver in where they can manage the hydrology. And the other extreme would be sites where the beavers are already there and they've been working for quite a while. And so we just go in and monitor the results and try to document some reference sites, what we're trying to achieve and some success criteria. Probably the highest degradation is in the water quality here. It's in an agricultural zone, so there's a lot of runoff down into the stream. And so that's a big reason we want to bring beaver into this site here. For this site, we're going to do some subsidizing. We're going to help build a dam on this fallen tree that's gone across the stream. And then, as I said, we're planting willow wattles and we're going to put some trees in and fence them off and hope to lure the beaver into this site. And here's another view of the same site. And you can see that the floodplain has been disconnected from the stream for quite a while. We have shallow rooting upland grasses and conifers right up near the stream edge. And the beaver will come in and they'll hold the water back, and as Amanda illustrated, the water table will rise to the surface away from the stream, and so you'll get those diversity of habitat types. Here's another site, and this is the Little Pond Ray National Wildlife Refuge. And the refuge manager here has been real cooperative and helpful and encouraging also. This is a site where there's already beaver there. This is a stream on the same property, and it has smaller dams that come and go, but enough to keep the water table high and extensive beyond just that general area of the central stream channel. And so these wetland plant species communities have expanded way away from the stream. And we'll use this hopefully as a reference site. This is what it should look like after we reintroduce the beavers, and they pool the water and then it recedes, and then you have the water table connected to the wetland. And this is another one of our sites where we released beaver, and it was really successful because it's obviously a pretty ideal situation. And there's already a lodge out there and everything, but the beaver had been trapped out, so we did some surveying, determined there weren't any left, and reintroduced a family of 8. And here we are releasing them there. our experimental design and monitoring, as Amanda mentioned, we started out just trying to do groundwater quantifying, but now we've expanded it to do other aspects of restoration that indicate a healthy beaver restoration habitat. So we're still doing groundwater, and these are piezometers, and they're just a pipe that goes in the ground, and they can tell how high the water table is. In this photo, you're standing at the stream and looking up the bank. So theoretically, we should be able to tell as the beavers expand the pond and build more water behind the dam. We can chart at what rate and extent the water moves away from the stream when the water table expands up towards the surface and away from the stream. And we've taken a lot of stress off the groundwater monitoring, and we're doing more vegetation as indicators of ideal beaver habitat and wetland restoration. As you get more and more wetland plant community groups farther from the stream channel, that would indicate that the water table has come up and the wetland plants can outcompete the upland plants. And so hopefully we can chart that progress and then compare this to our reference site and see how the community groups compare with that. That would show success criteria for the wetland restoration. Now, a lot of people are experimenting with subsidizing so that they can get beaver to stay in the monitoring zone, because you have to be able to take preliminary data and compare it with what happens afterwards. Because this is sort of innovative monitoring around a moving target, but it's also kind of exciting. This is one of our favorite trapping locations. It had a comfy little bank lodge underneath this floating dock. So Amanda and I camped when we trapped these. We kind of monitored it overnight, and next morning we collected them. So there's like 8 beaver we collected in three days. And it's nice when we could get the whole family like that, because they are really a cohesive unit, and they tend to stick together at a relocation site. And finally, here's a couple photos of one of the families where we had a lot of adults, and that's our holding unit there. We would hold them for no longer than a week. So yeah, that's it.